Doom or boon? An increasingly heated and hostile debate on the EU Brexit referendum is dividing the United Kingdom and exposing the fault lines of Europe. In this special edition of the Global Conversation, I speak to two prominent members of the European Parliament on different sides of that political divide. Nigel Farage, head of UKIP and an outspoken campaigner for leaving the EU, and Guy Verhofstadt, former Belgian Prime Minister and a staunch defender of further EU integration. Nigel Farage, many thanks for joining us on the Global Conversation. You could soon be rubbing your hands in glee if Britain chooses to leave the EU. But as that vote fast approaches, do you have any niggling doubts of the risks that could entail?
None. Do you know, I spent 20 years in business. I spent 20 years involved in international trade, buying and selling, shipping things through Rotterdam. And what I know is that trade is not created by politicians. It's not created by bureaucrats. Trade is created because a consumer looks at a product and says, I want that product, I trust that product, and I will pay that price.
But then this is a leap into the unknown, as you know well yourself, because most likely Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty will be invoked, and our fate, well, Britain's fate, will be decided by the other 27 member states.
Let's have a think about that. First, the long term. Why did my parents' generation vote to stay part of what was then called a common market? Two reasons. One, they were told it was not political. And secondly, because it gave us tariff-free access into the European marketplace. 40 years on, where are we? We have a different world through globalisation, through never-ending rounds of GATT and the World Trade Organization. The original reason for getting into this, namely the high tariff barriers, have all but disappeared.
Yes, but then there's going to be just as high a risk of higher tariffs if we leave.
Hang on. But no, because they can't, because of the World Trade Organization pre-agreed rules. Now, so the worst case scenario.
So if we leave the EU, the European single market, you would say we will basically apply WTO rules, which don't particularly like services, which Britain is strong at.
Well, let's just suppose, for argument's sake, that Germany and France and the Eurozone decide to cut off their noses to spite their faces with their biggest global trading partner, with whom they trade at a surplus of getting on for 90 billion euros a year. The worst case scenario, they put tariffs on our goods, right? The total cost of those tariffs is lower than our net membership fee. We would not have to accept future EU rules. We would not have to accept unlimited free movement of people. And here's the bonus, we'd be able to negotiate our own trade deals globally.
OK, so Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, has said that Britain leaving is a very bad idea.
Well, of course she has. We're the second biggest contributor.
US President Obama has said it's a very bad idea, that we'll go to the back of the queue of all trade negotiations.
Well,
the OECD has said it's a bad idea, as has the IMF.
Whoa a second.
Are you going to...
We don't have a trade deal with America at all. There's been no queue, ever. And when I see the IMF and the OECD and all these publicly funded groups, a little bell rings in the back of my head, and it's called the euro. When all these different groups were telling us, if Britain doesn't join the euro, direct investment will collapse, the city will close down, dreadful, biblical things will happen to the United Kingdom. Well, all I can say is they were wrong then, and they're wrong now. OK,
then what about the fact that a recent Ipsos Mori poll, which is a respected organisation, interviewed 639 economists in Britain. Only 5% of those said they weren't self-selected.
It was self-selected.
They were not self-selected. They came from the Royal Economic Society and the Society of Business Economists. 5% of those said that Brexit would be positive for growth. Only 5%.
I looked at that poll, and it was a self-selecting poll. It was those that answered the questionnaire, effectively. It's meaningless. Look, the consensus...
Then therefore you will say, yes, so the consensus is that it's a bad idea, so you're going against the consensus.
You bet your life I am. That's what got me into politics. The consensus in 1990 said Britain should join the exchange rate mechanism. We should peg sterling against the Deutschmark. And you know, every major political party in Britain supported it. The trade unions supported it. But in 1992, we had record house repossessions and record business bankruptcies in Britain because we pegged sterling against the Deutschmark. Okay. And you know something? I was against that consensus, and it was that consensus that was the same consensus that said join the euro, that was the same consensus that failed to see the credit crunch and the collapse of 2008-9. They've been wrong about everything else, and frankly, on these issues, I've been right.
Let's look at some of the other issues that this has been fought upon. Immigration has been one of the big issues for UKIP. Immigration has been shown to be good for the British economy. British economy is growing. So
of course it's growing.
But why risk that?
Of course it's growing. If your population increases by 500,000 a year, your GDP figures go up. What doesn't go up is GDP per capita. And what you cannot measure, okay, because we look at this in terms of what does a migrant worker pay in tax and what do they take out in benefits, what we don't measure is capital cost. How many new schools? How many new hospitals? How many new roads? You know, how on earth can we cope? But you know something? There are some things in life that matter more than GDP figures, and that is quality of life and cohesion of your community.
Controlling our borders, we see you brandishing your passport quite often.
I do.
You've got it with you?
I mean, I'd never leave home without it. I mean, we used to have a British passport. It used to be one of the great prizes.
And you don't like the fact that Europe is written on it?
Gone. European Union. I don't want this. I mean, I want to burn them all.
Yes, but the very fact that you have your British passport shows that there are border checks when you go to Britain. We are not part of the Schengen zone.
But we can't stop anybody coming unless they pose, with the only EU citizens we can stop at the borders are people who pose a direct threat.
Well, who else do you want to stop?
I wouldn't have anybody coming to get a job in my country who had a criminal record. Why would I? Why would any civilised nation... Why would any civilised nation...
The 2004 EU Citizens Directive does say that if there is suspicion, people can be halted from coming in. I've seen these figures.
But it has to be an imminent threat. That's the point. Look, all I'm arguing here, all I'm arguing is for the United Kingdom to become a normal country. Normal countries all around the world make their own laws and control their own borders. Indeed, there are, do you know, there are over 183 countries in the world that celebrate Independence Days. All I'm asking for is us to become the 184th.
Would it be safer if we're outside the EU?
Oh, goodness me, yes, in two ways. One, in terms of the terrorist threat. Whilst we are outside Schengen, and I get that, and I'm grateful that we are, you know, I think when the boss of Europol and Interpol, you know, just talk about the sheer number of extremists that we've allowed into Europe, that worries me greatly.
But then if we're outside of Schengen, why do they pose us a risk?
Because in a matter of time, people get naturalised and get EU passports and then can freely come to Britain. But the other bigger issue here, and I really don't think internationally we've thought enough about this, we know that the week after the British referendum, there'll be discussions here about the formation of a European army. Now that I'm really genuinely worried about.
You've also been, and you say you're demonised because people say that you're a racist.
Oh, God.
Do you retract your comments that you made about migrants increasing the possibility of rape of women?
Well, I didn't say that. I said it is an issue.
Well, if it's an issue, you're certainly bringing it up. So
sorry, would you say it's not an issue?
I would say it's not an issue that necessarily needs to be brought up because it can be seen as scaremongering.
Oh, I see. So we should bury it under the carpet.
No, is it scaremongering when you say these things? If it's an issue.
Were the 26 sex attacks that took place 12 days ago at a rock concert in Germany, I mean, is that scaremongering, or should we hide that too? Look, it's very interesting, this. It's very interesting. On this issue of the Cologne sex attacks, the rock concert sex attacks, when I was asked about it, I gave, I thought, the softest, gentlest answer I've ever given. I've said it is an issue, but it's not one for now. But you know, it's a much longer-term question. And it's interesting that this has been picked up. There are commentators, there are former cabinet ministers who've said things far stronger than me.
Yes, but at the same time, you have argued that you wouldn't want to have Romanians moving in next door to you.
I've never said that.
You've also
this is all conflating
Okay,
rubbish.
you've also said that we're having our noses rubbed in diversity. So you can see why these issues of racism do stick to you.
Who said Andrew Nether who work for Tony Blair in Downing Street said we will rub the noses of the right in diversity and opened us up to mass immigration on a scale we've never seen before. Is it any wonder 77% of the British public now want us to take back border controls?
OK, well, a couple of final questions. If you lose this vote, the Brexit vote, obviously it's been the work of a lifetime, will you resign?
That's rather like asking a general who's going into battle, what will he do if he loses?
OK, there we are. I'm asking you that question. What will you do?
I can't contemplate it. I'd be mad to contemplate it. How could I be sitting talking to you, having driven through the night, not been to bed, working my hardest in these last few days to try and get Brexit? I can't contemplate defeat. Ask me afterwards if it goes wrong. OK,
and then finally, give me the one reason, if you had to just isolate one reason why Britain should leave the EU, in a nutshell, why?
Because the best people to govern Britain are the British people themselves. We should do so through the ballot box and our own parliament.
Nigel Farage, many thanks for having joined us. Even those arguing for more Europe and for Britain to stay a part of it, Brexit could even be an opportunity. Guy Verhofstadt next. He's the president of the Alliance and Liberals and Democrats for Europe at the European Parliament. Guy Verhofstadt, many thanks for joining us on the Global Conversation. Do you think the Brexit referendum could be a blessing in disguise? I don't have to remind you of whom Jean Monnet is, but one of the founding fathers of the EU, and he said the EU would be forged through crises. Could this be the crisis necessary for the EU?
I don't see it as a crisis, but I see it as an opportunity. It could be a game changer. It could be a momentum in our history that creates enormous opportunities.
What opportunities?
Well, to fix the European Union, because the European Union does work very well. It's not difficult to recognize that if you see the crisis on the refugees, the crisis on terror, the crisis on the euro, the geopolitical weakness of Europe, it's not difficult to recognize that this Europe doesn't work. So for me, the Brexit, with a yes or with a no, is an opportunity to open the discussion about the fundamentals of the European Union, the foundations of the European Union.
You're also opening up Pandora's box, though, because you have no idea what would happen. So say if...
Pandora's box is now. Pandora's box is now already, because everybody says, we don't need different types of membership. I say we have already 28 different types of membership. There doesn't exist one European Union. I think in my book on the Europe's Last Chance and on the disease of Europe, I describe at least 12 different European Unions that exist today. So we have to get rid of this. And I think the discussion around Britain is an opportunity to establish what I call a core group, going further in integration.
If Britain chooses to leave, how important will it be to make an example of Britain, to make sure other countries don't want to leave as well?
The majority of all these people want to remain in the European Union, but not in this European Union. You have to make a huge difference between what people think about this European Union, or a European Union that doesn't work, who create crises, and we talked about that, or the Europe as a whole, Europe as an idea, Europe as a project, as a vision for the future. And there, many people, most people, a huge majority of people want Europe and want a more integrated European Union, even a defence community.
Well, Brexiteers will argue that they'll be safer outside of the European Union. Do you think that that is possible?
I don't think that is the opinion. For example, of Barack Obama, who said in Britain that it should be stupid that Britain is going out of the European Union. If we don't solve the problems, if we don't reform in-depth European Union, more and more people, and that's true, will be populist, will go to nationalist, voting for nationalist and populist parties and Eurosceptic parties. And for that reason, in my book, what I did was to subscribe most of the criticism of Eurosceptics and populist parties. They are right when they are criticizing this European Union, but they are wrong when they are saying to solve the problems of the European Union, we have to go back to the past and to the old-style nation-states of the 19th century.
Well, one big issue for the Brexiteers, for those who want to leave, is immigration.
Yeah.
And many on the Leave campaign are fed up, for example, with the freedom of movement. And they argue that in Britain that services are overstretched. Would you advocate reviewing the freedom of movement?
That doesn't count in general for Europe, because in Europe what we see is a lack of labour mobility. Labour mobility in Europe is 10 times lower than, for example, in the United States. And one of the consequences of this is that there are 2 million of vacancies in Europe. 2 million of working places that are not fulfilled with people. But why they have a point is there is a lack of a European approach on migration, on asylum, on refugees. The reality is that doesn't exist even a European migration, asylum or refugee policy.
Well, exactly. Well, tell us, because you discuss this in your book. So what would be your solution to the refugee crisis, which would not alienate more European citizens?
Three things. First of all, the first thing to do is a European border and coast guard. That doesn't exist. Can you imagine that you have a freedom of movement inside the European Union, but there is no common border management at the outside borders, with all the problems we have and we see now on the border between Greece and Turkey. The second is one asylum system. Dublin is not an asylum system.
The Dublin regulation.
The Dublin regulation is the opposite. It's saying to the Italians and to the Greeks, well, it's your business, it's your responsibility, and we are not responsible for it. And three, legal entrance in Europe has to be possible. With like the Americans have one green card, Canadians have it, Australians have it. We not. In Europe we have 28 different national regulations on migration.
So those on the Leave campaign will also use the fear factor, and they will say that migration is linked to terrorism and insecurity. What do you say to that?
Well, also there Europe is the solution. Because, let's be honest, we need European capacities on questions of intelligence and fight against terror. You know, the FBI has been created in 1901. We need the same thing on the European level.
But we're not, at the moment, in the current context, that is not going to happen. So what would be your answer to security?
I was president of the council when we created the European arrest warrant. The arrest warrant was created after the 9/11
But it's not
attack.
the same as having an FBI.
And we need to do that, because otherwise we continue with scandals like we have seen after the Paris attacks, where Abdesalam, in the night of the Paris attacks, was stopped near to the Belgian border. And the French police didn't know him, didn't recognize him. The Belgian police knew it, the French police didn't do it, and he could continue his way.
A large part of the malaise in Europe began with the economic crisis. Now, if we bring this back to the Brexit debate, those on the Leave campaign say they would be far more nimble, far more agile without the shackles of the EU, without having to deal with the bureaucracy, and without having to necessarily trade with the EU, which has got a stagnant economy.
Yeah, but the figures are a little bit different. Most figures and most analysis showing an enormous disadvantage if Britain should leave the European Union. It's not me, but experts who say that there could be a loss of economic growth between 2 and 10%, and in the disadvantage of Britain. So I think in any way it's a bad thing.
Well, you're obviously an arched federalist. That's your European dream. You describe it in your book.
Federalism is not a bad word.
It's not a swear word.
No, because the most powerful nation in the world is the most powerful nation. The US, United States of America, is a federal state. So a federal state is a sign of strength. And a sign to combine our strengths.
In theory, that is great, but your critics will say you're flogging a dead horse because the context has changed too much. That is not possible in the current time.
And this is the opposite, it's true. We have to compete with whom? With China. China is not a nation. China is a civilization, Han civilization, like we are, a European civilization. India is not a nation. India are 2,000 ethnies and nations. And on top of that, 20 languages and 4 big religions, the biggest democracy. The US is the same, are 50 states with their own constitution working together. The world of tomorrow is a world of empires, not a world of small nations.
Finally, Guy Verhofstadt, I have One tricky question for you, possibly. I want you to give me the one reason why Britain should stay in the EU.
To stay, it's very simple. Geopolitically, the interest of Britain, geopolitically, is to stay in European Union. The only guy, I think, who should laugh with a vote, a Brexit vote, a vote to leave, is Vladimir Putin. He likes a divided Europe. So for geopolitical reasons, that's the one most important reasons why Britain should remain in the European Union.
Thank you very much for having been with us on the programme.